Yeah, nice to see so many of you joining us this afternoon. So I'm Carolyn Yeoman, I'm an organisational psychologist. I've been working in the field of stress, wellbeing, culture, numerous things for over 25 years, and spend a lot of time helping organisations develop mental health wellbeing strategies. And I'm delighted to be working with the team at Inspiration All. So I'm going to give you my take on a culture of care, very much from a wellbeing perspective. So I think it's well recognised that now more than ever we do need this culture of care, and people are talking about, you know, it's the legal thing to do in terms of HSE and work-related stress. You know, it's the smart thing to do, as Kevin talked about. It's smart as an organisation to start to think about this whole idea of a culture of care, and it's also the right thing to do. I mean, morally, we should be caring for our people, but often we hear people are our most valuable asset. We hear it all the time. I mean, what a load of rubbish. People don't honestly believe that. I mean, they should be our most valuable asset, but often the way in which we treat our people within our organisations doesn't send that message to them at all. It sends very different messages. So just to recap briefly on what Kevin had said, and he talked about, you know, this whole model, and you'll see at the bottom there is this whole idea of caring. And so this is the bit that I like to interweave really with well-being. But what is caring? I mean, it's certainly not, and I think Phil talked about it briefly, but it's certainly not soft and fluffy. It's not, you know, going around hugging people constantly and saying nice, trite things to people at all. For me, it's not. It's very much about culture, and that culture and that tone of that culture is set from the very top of an organisation. So unless we can start to think about a culture of care coming from the top down, then I don't think we really stand much chance at all of trying to get this culture moving forward. So for me, caring is a tangible thing that we should be able to see and feel within organisations. That's often not the case at the moment, which is why my talk was entitled Beyond Bikes and Bananas, because one of the most frustrating things that I find when I'm working with organisations is the fact that people take a culture of care, well-being, whatever you want to call it, and think, well, it's about doing things for people, it's about interventions, it's about giving people access to, you know, bike schemes, fruit bowls on tables, employee assistance programs, mental health first aiders. So all this stuff that we sort of chuck at people, and we say, well, it's a really good idea if we're going to look at well-being that we give people things. And often, again, I think it was Phil that mentioned it, what this is actually saying subliminally is that it's the person's fault. So if you're not feeling great, your mental health's not great, whatever, then we're going to give you the tool so you can go off and help yourself. So we'll give you fruit to help you eat healthily, and we'll help you buy a bike so you can get a bit more fit physically. So we concentrate very much on this whole, for me, tertiary level interventions. We throw money at a series of one-off interventions. And often when I work with companies and we're talking about wellbeing strategy and what a strategy should be, people will proudly bring out a strategy document. And when you look at it, lo and behold, it's a series of one-off interventions. So it's, you know, January, we're going to focus on not smoking, or not drinking often is January. So not drinking in January. February is not smoking. You know, once we've moved on to March, well, that might be Stress Awareness Month. So we'll do something on that. So it's this series of interventions that we put into place, and we think that shows that we care. But actually, it doesn't show that we care. What shows that we care is if as an organisation and if as leaders, we look at what we're doing to our people. So what is it about our organisation, our culture, our style of leaders that is causing people to feel mentally unwell? There's an element of, you know, some stuff comes in from outside of work, obviously. So we do get issues most of us, that are non-work related. And there's nothing wrong with providing help and support for those. And, you know, an emotionally intelligent leader will be able to pick up when people on signs and symptoms that somebody is struggling on a personal level. So there's things we can do for that, that's fine. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have employee assistance programs or mental health first aid. I'm not saying we shouldn't provide fruit bowls or any of that, but on their own, they're not a wellbeing strategy, and on their own, they're not going to be giving us what we need in terms of moving towards this culture of care. Because what we're doing when we look at those sorts of interventions are the tertiary. It's treatment. It's treating somebody who's somehow not feeling great for whatever reason. So we make the person the problem, and I think that might have been a term that Phil used, but we make the person the problem. And that's where we focus. And actually, when we look at it, the focus should be very much, which is what this triangle's attempting to show, the focus should be up at the top on the primary. So the focus should be on how do we prevent people from getting stressed or feeling mentally unwell at a company level. And that has to start at the top. It has to start with role modelling behaviour from the board all the way down. Then we move on to our secondary interventions, and they obviously are about trying to stop people from falling, but they're at an employee level. So what we're talking about here are things like all the leadership development work that we do, developing emotionally intelligent, engaging leaders. That's part of preventing ill health or promoting a culture of care at a leadership level. We can do things like helping individuals to build resilience. We can do mental health awareness training. There's a whole host of stuff we can do at this preventative level, and we need to do that too. And more companies are starting to do that, and certainly during lockdown, a lot of, frustratingly in some ways for me, a lot of the focus from organisations have been at just churning out hour after hour of online, how to build resilience, how to work effectively from home, all this stuff that's useful. It's useful. We need to know, we need to understand, you know, ourselves, how we can become more resilient. But it's not what we should be doing as a focus from an organisation, where we're trying to move towards this whole culture of care. And so what I did last year, maybe in the year before, was to try and combine these thoughts on how we do well-being within organisations, how we promote a culture of care within organisations, and link that to some of the things that we've been talking about and that we know from the world of safety. So some of you will be involved in the world of safety, and I've done a lot of work with safety culture and behavioural safety over the years, and we often assess safety culture, and we say we're at a particular level. And what we find now is that if we do any sort of well-being culture survey, that well-being culture is always way behind safety culture. So whereas we might actually be doing pretty well in terms of safety culture, with well-being culture or our culture of care, often we're at a much lower level. And so when we start to try and assess organisations and look at where they are and what they do, often what we find is that still most companies sit in the bottom two categories on here. So, you know, they're either ad hoc, which is these, you know, really well-being isn't on the radar as a strategic priority, but there are occasional one-off health promotion activities. So we might get a nurse in to do blood pressure, we might do cholesterol checks, we might provide flu jabs, whatever. So occasional one-off health promotion activities. Many companies sit at that level. If they don't sit there, they tend to sit at the next level, which is very much this focus, as I said, on tertiary interventions, on the bikes, on the bananas, maybe a bit of resilience building, but not much else. The problem is that what happens there is there's no evaluation of what the impact is. Do people feel more cared for because you're providing this? Generally, no. So what can happen is that organisations become obsessed on these individual level interventions. They become obsessed, they do more and more without realising that they're never going to change the culture by simply piling on more and more interventions. Where organisations have moved slightly further is often where they've been pushed down the risk management route, which is often through health and safety. It's through, you know, HSE, because HSE very much talk about work-related stress, and they talk about that as a risk, and they talk about how we need to be doing work-related stress risk assessments, and they tend to confine themselves to that. I worked with the stress policy team at HSE for a couple of years, and we were very much trying to push the boundaries of that and say, well, actually we need to move beyond work-related stress towards well-being more generally, and there was a lot of pushback on that, and there still is. So HSE very much, because it's, you know, regulatory and it's about health and safety, they very much concentrate on the risk management approach to work-related stress. And so some organisations are doing stress risk assessments, and as a result of that, they're putting in place interventions. But again, there's a danger there that we just become obsessed with compliance and tick boxes. Which is what we did with safety for a long time. It was all about, have we done a risk assessment, tick the box, have we done this, tick the box. And so that's another potential risk with this whole risk management approach to well-being. I think where we have a real need to get to is this culture of care, as we've been talking about. And the only way that we achieve that is through engaging leadership and through employee engagement. And we've heard, you know, we've heard some great talks already from, you know, Juliet and Kevin and Phil, who've all been talking about this whole idea of, you know, leadership is key in terms of a culture of care. And it really is. Unless we have leaders who are, you know, walking the walk and talking the talk about well-being, they're happy to initiate conversations about mental health, they're happy to talk about their own issues and help and try and help individuals in terms of identifying what might make the world of work a bit better, then that's where we need to be. We need to be moving towards that real culture of care. It's a win-win. Why wouldn't you do it? It really is a no-brainer, and it's not hard to do. I think the problem is that there's a perception that once we start talking about stress and mental health, that it's all a bit scary. And so therefore we just close it back down, which is where this whole stigma is still there about mental health. And, you know, we shouldn't be talking about it. So it's okay to talk about the fact that I'm working from home all the time at the moment, and it's causing me problems with my back, or because I'm working at home all the time now, I'm eating too much and I've put weight on and that's causing me stress. But it's not okay to say, actually, I'm feeling really isolated and it's making me fed up, and that's not okay. It's still not okay. And so we've still got a lot of work to do in terms of breaking down the boundaries and changing the stigma that results in that. And what I'd like to see ultimately is that top level of maturity in terms of wellbeing culture, or a culture of care, which is where we've got people thriving in our organisations. Because what we talk about so much now is resilience and resilient people. Well, resilience and resilient people suggests that we're okay, which is good. Obviously it's good. We want to be resilient. We want to weather the storm. And resilience, by the way, isn't about falling over and getting back up again. Resilience is about standing tall in the face of adversity. So it's like a tree, you know, a strong tree with good roots, blowing in the wind, the gales come, it sways a lot, but it stays upright. That's a resilient tree. Most trees don't bend in the storm and then fall over, crack in half, lie on the floor, and then miraculously, you know, they get back up and there's suddenly a tree standing tall again. So resilience isn't about falling over, hitting the ground and dragging yourself back up. Resilience is about building sufficient defences within yourself so that when things start to get bad, you're able to draw on those defences. And that's why we've got a lot of work to do with people in terms of helping them to develop resilience. But all resilience means is that we're doing okay. We can cope with adversity. We can deal with what life and work is throwing at us. That doesn't mean we're thriving. And to me, where we want to get to and what a culture of care gives us is that thriving workplace where people are happy. You can see it in the faces. You can feel it when you walk into an organisation where there's a genuine culture of care and a general feeling of wanting people to be happy and functioning well. And that starts at the top. So for me, with a culture of care, what we do is we start at the top with a strategy and with the board buying into it, ideally writing that strategy. So a lot of the work that needs to happen isn't happening at the moment, as I say, unfortunately. It was starting to. It's taken a bit of a backward step with COVID. Hopefully it will start to improve. But until we start to actually look at well-being and a culture of care at a strategic level, then I think we're going to be confined to these tertiary interventions for some time to come. So that's my take, very quick take on well-being and a culture of care. So I look forward to answering any questions that anybody may have.
Thanks, Carolyn. It's the trouble with trying to do this when we're covering a huge amount of ground today, aren't we, between the 9 of us in a relatively short space of time. And I've realised I've been pushing us along probably quicker than I needed to because I misread my clock because my phone had switched itself off. But a couple of things that immediately occur to me from this is this disconnection between what we really need to be thinking about and what companies are actually doing. What is it that you think that leaders need to understand that they don't understand now? Because it clearly isn't working right now in lots of organisations. What is it they're missing?
Well, I think what leaders are missing is, to some extent, it's the impact of their behaviour on their teams. So that often leaders don't realise that they can be either cultivating stress, as it were, amongst their team, or they can actually be the opposite of that. And unfortunately, as we've already talked about, we talk about engaging leaders or emotionally intelligent leadership, whatever term we want to use, we still don't have a huge number of those people in our workplaces. So we still have lots of managers, not leaders. And some of those managers do not have the skills required to understand that the way I behave, the way I speak to people, the way I communicate with people has an impact on the way my people are feeling around me. And that has an impact on my approachability and on my ability to help them. So I think at a line manager level, that's the issue. I think at a board level, I think it's just very much that, unfortunately, we've fallen into the trap of seeing well-being as being quite a sort of a low-level thing, and well-being as being something that is about the individual and helping individuals, rather than seeing it as a sort of a strategic priority and something that underpins everything else. And it's you know, you've talked about it, Kevin's talked about it, I've been talking about it for a number of years, and I'm starting to see more and more people picking up on it on places like LinkedIn. But it's still very much, even for me, if I say, when people say what area do you specialise in, and I go well-being, they automatically assume that I do yoga or I'm a counsellor or something, and I have to, you know, explain what well-being means in terms of organisations and culture and strategy.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it, that our ability to misperceive this. This also goes back to the stuff that Jules was talking about, that the trouble with a lot of the activity to address this is it's people's businesses to do it. There's somebody who does well-being, somebody who does personality profile, somebody who does leadership training or whatever. And so it becomes that the purpose of them doing it is in order to make money to survive, rather than necessarily in order for the greater good or to make a difference on a wider scale. So it's quite hard to separate this out with any kind of purity of intention, if you like, I guess.
It is, yeah. And I think one of the problems that we faced with the whole COVID thing is that, because obviously we were forced into a lot of people working from home, the initial sort of reaction to that was, well, we need to help people be more resilient. Everybody's going to get mentally unwell, so we need to help more quickly. And so that's why we've thrown money and resource at, you know, some frankly pretty poor online training, that is just the sort of thing you could get, you know, free if you Google it, or you could buy a really good book and it would just do the same thing. So I think it's been a knee-jerk reaction by organisations that we need to do something, whereas actually the better would have been to think, well, okay, people are being forced to work at home. So as an organisation, what do we need to do to support them and enable them to do that in a productive way? And what do our managers and our leaders need to be doing in order to ensure that the people within their teams are well? And we've not taken that perspective very often. Some organisations have, but generally it's just been about resilience building.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to Phil's point very early on, which was about by sort of compartmentalizing it as an activity we take, we're kind of implying that it's people's fault for not being strong enough.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to fix. I've always believed that the best way to solve a problem is not to create the bloody thing in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe if we had better behaviours, better understanding, better recognition of the greater good throughout an organisation, then we wouldn't have a problem to solve. But we're a long way away from there yet, aren't we?
Yeah, unfortunately we are. Small steps.
Yeah, well, yeah. One of my colleagues years ago used to accuse me of being a bull in a china shop. I don't know where he got that idea from. Once said to me, "You want everybody to make quantum leaps, and most people can't do that. What you need to make is small steps quickly."
Yeah,
that really kind of resonated with me, and I've tried to do that since. But I recognised I didn't used to do that. I wanted everyone to go to the far end right now, because that's what it needs to be.
Yeah.
And maybe that small steps is the critical issue. But the thing about small steps is they're not steps unless you actually take them.
No.
Thank you for that. I'm going to